On the 19th of October 1959, a routine training flight turned into a horrifying situation for 8 men aboard a Boeing 707 destined for Braniff International Airways. Departing from Boeing Field in Seattle, Washington, the flight was intended to showcase the aircraft's capabilities to potential customers. Little did they anticipate the terror that would unfold within hours. As the plane soared through the skies, demonstrating maneuvers for its future operators, something went tragically wrong. How did a routine training session turn into a life-and-death struggle? Will their expertise and quick thinking be enough to overcome the unexpected challenges they face? Watch till the end to uncover the dramatic events of that fateful day and the shocking aftermath. On that day, the Boeing 707-227, identified as November 7071, was part of a demonstration and acceptance routine before the aircraft was to be delivered to its new owner. Alongside this, the company was also using the flight to provide training for airline personnel on this new aircraft. The Boeing 707s were powered by 4 Pratt & Whitney JT4A3 turbojet engines, which were a common engine choice for this model of aircraft during that era, and Braniff Airways eventually operated a fleet of 18 Boeing 707s between 1959 and 1975. The instructor pilot on this flight was also from Boeing and was there to demonstrate various maneuvers to a trainee pilot who was an airline captain preparing for his first training session on the Boeing 707. It was on a special flight to show that it met all the performance standards promised by Boeing and to train some pilots from Braniff Airways, and was operated at an altitude around 12,000 feet above an overcast cloud layer. The crew included instructor pilot Russell H. Baum from Boeing, Braniff co-pilots Captain J.A. Burke and M.F. Staley, and Boeing flight engineer G.C. Hagan. There were also 4 passengers: Braniff flight engineer A.G. Krause, Braniff technical instructor F.W. Simank, Boeing pilot W.J. Alsop, and FAA inspector W.H. Hubner. How crucial do you think complete training and thorough testing are for introducing new aircraft models into service? Before the flight, Baum briefed the crew about the takeoff and the maneuvers they would perform. Initially, they planned to fly under instrument flight rules, aka IFR, but switched to visual flight rules, or VFR, just before departure. This change allowed them to fly based on what they could see rather than relying solely on instruments. The plane was fueled for 5 hours of flight with a total weight of 208,000 pounds, and everything was set for roughly 4-hour and 15-minute journey. Captain Burke, on his first flight with the 707, sat in the left seat and Baum in the right. Krause took on the flight engineer's role. The flight started smoothly, with Baum demonstrating various maneuvers that Burke then practiced. One of these maneuvers was the Dutch roll, where the plane's wings roll and twist back and forth. Boeing had already proved the 707's maneuverability in previous test flights. Baum showed Burke how to recover from these rolls properly, and Burke repeated the process successfully. Next, they slowed the plane to 155 knots and lowered the flaps to 40 degrees. Again, Baum demonstrated the Dutch roll recovery and Burke practiced. However, during these exercises, the plane's bank angles exceeded the 25-degree limit set by Boeing. At one point, Alsop leaned over to remind Baum about this restriction. Baum acknowledged that he was aware of it but continued the maneuvers. What do you think were the factors influencing Baum's decision to exceed Boeing's bank angle limits during the training flight? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Up to this point, Captain Burke had been practicing Dutch roll recoveries, but only from the left side. Baum, the instructor, suggested that they try one from the right side. He then started another Dutch roll, but this time the plane's bank angle was very steep, estimated to be between 40 and 60 degrees. As the plane rolled back and forth, Burke let it complete several oscillations. Then, while the plane was still banking to the right, Burke tried to recover by applying full right aileron control. This means he was trying to roll the plane back to level flight by moving the right wing up. However, the plane reacted violently, twisting and rolling quickly to the right, even past a 90-degree bank. Seeing the situation spiral out of control, Baum took over and applied full left aileron to counteract the roll. Despite his efforts, the plane continued to roll past vertical and then even more violently to the left. During these intense rolls, the passengers heard noises that might have been the engines breaking away from the plane. They also noticed the thrust levers snapping and the control cables going loose. They couldn't agree on the exact number of rotations, but they did agree that the plane spun to the left and eventually slowed down, almost stopping in an inverted nose-down position. Burke managed to bring the plane back to an upright position, but it was in a medium dive. Now, what factors do you think contributed to the escalating loss of control during this critical maneuver? As they pulled out of the dive, it became clear how severe the damage was. Instruments showed that 3 of the 4 engines, numbers 1, 2, and 4, had lost all thrust, and the thrust and start levers for these engines were slack. To make matters worse, Flight Engineer Kraus reported a complete loss of electrical power. During most of the flight and throughout the wild spins, all 8 people were on the flight deck. Once they managed to regain some control, Mr. Huebner went to the back of the plane to check for damage. He noticed that engine number 1 and number 4 were missing, and there were 3 small fires where they had been. Engine number 2 was still attached, but on fire and hanging at a strange angle with its tailpipe pointing into the flap. Huebner returned to the flight deck and told the pilots what he saw. Soon after, Mr. Alsop also saw a big fire where engine number 2 was located and confirmed that engines number 1 and number 4 were gone too. At this point, the plane had descended through the clouds, and Alsop suggested they ditch in Lake Kavanaugh, which was nearby. However, Baum, who was now controlling the plane, seemed to be looking for a better place to land or trying to reach a nearby airfield and kept circling east of the lake. During this time, Mr. Hagen took over the flight engineer station. Meanwhile, Kraus, Semank, Alsop, and Huebner moved to the back of the plane and prepared for a ditching. The fire from their area around engine number 2 continued to burn fiercely, eventually burning a hole in the flaps and consuming most of the left inboard aileron. It even burned through the top wing surface, exposing the wing's internal structure. The uncontrolled movements had initially started when Burke, trying to recover from a Dutch roll, applied full right aileron while the plane was still rolling right. This made the plane twist and roll heavily to the right beyond a 90-degree bank. Baum quickly took over and applied full left aileron to counteract this, but the plane continued to roll violently to the left before they managed to stabilize it. Weather was not a factor in this accident, although a thin, broken, overcast cloud cover existed over the area with ceilings around 4,000 feet. Several ground witnesses saw the aircraft after it emerged from the clouds. The probable flight path of the plane, as shown in the report, is based on the evaluation of these witness sightings. Witnesses west of the final crash site described hearing the aircraft on an easterly heading in or above the clouds, producing an unusual sound similar to breaking the sound barrier. Shortly after, they saw 3 objects fall out of the overcast, which turned out to be engines number 1, 2, and 4. The jet engine sound continued as the aircraft emerged from the clouds on a northeasterly heading on fire and descending. Other witnesses, located further east, saw the burning aircraft make a sweeping left turn near the east end of Lake Kavanaugh, straightening out on a southeasterly heading of about 110 degrees. During this turn, they heard an explosion-like noise and the jet engine sound ceased. The only sound afterward was a loud whistling noise. Several witnesses familiar with the Boeing 707 noted that only 1 engine remained on the aircraft and that a severe fire was burning where the number 2 engine had been. One witness observed that the fire had burned away a large portion of the trailing edge of the wing in that area. The aircraft continued on its southeasterly path down Deer Creek and then made a gradual right turn to a heading of 230 degrees. By this time, it had descended to nearly treetop level. The plane maintained this heading for about a mile, descending until it finally contacted the treetops and crashed in the Stillaguamish riverbed approximately half a mile short of a large open field that Baum had undoubtedly selected for the emergency landing. The first contact with treetops, which were 110 feet high, occurred on the north side of the river, nearly 1,400 feet from where the fuselage struck the ground. 400 feet from this initial contact, the aircraft hit another row of trees along the north bank of the river at a height of about 90 feet. The path cut through these trees, which varied in diameter from 7 to 13 inches, matched the width of the wingspan, showing the aircraft was in a wings-level attitude. A 16-foot section of the left wingtip was severed by contact with these trees. As the aircraft crossed the river, the left wing, which was rapidly dropping, cut a path inclined at an angle of 45 to 50 degrees through more trees on the south bank. Toward the end of this cut, the left wing contacted the ground, gouging several long ditches in the sandy soil. As the aircraft continued its forward travel, the left wing progressively broke up until the fuselage finally struck the ground. But why do you think the aircraft did not manage to reach the open field that was so close? Now, the forward portion of the fuselage was almost completely destroyed by the impact and the intense ground fire that followed. The aft fuselage broke off just to the rear of the trailing edge of the wing and skidded out into the middle of the river. Although it was badly damaged by in-flight fire and ground impact, this section remained intact and was not subjected to the ground fire that consumed most of the other wreckage. The Boeing 707 crash landed on the farm owned by Anton and Ada Osip. hustler. When the accident occurred, Anton hurried to the river but was unable to approach the wreckage due to the intense fire and recurrent explosions. Meanwhile, Ada quickly ran to their farmhouse and called the Snohomish County Sheriff's Department for help. This prompted an immediate response from various emergency services, including the State Patrol, police, fire departments, ambulance crews, and volunteers from nearby communities. The first responders to arrive were sailors from the Jim Creek Naval Radio Station, located 6 miles south of Oso. They brought firefighting equipment and worked quickly to control the flames and prevent them from spreading further. Their efforts were crucial in managing the fire until additional emergency personnel could reach the scene. Instructor pilot Baum, Braniff co-pilots Captains Burke and Staley, and flight engineer G. Hagen tragically died when the plane crashed. Braniff Flight Engineer Krause, Technical Instructor Semank, Boeing pilot Alsop, and FAA Inspector Hubner survived but were injured, ranging from minor to serious. The survivors, dealing with shock and hypothermia, were immediately transported by ambulance to Arlington General Hospital for urgent medical care. Throughout the night, search teams recovered the bodies of the 4 victims who were tragically burned almost beyond recognition. 3 were found in the middle of the smoldering wreckage of the cockpit, while the 4th was recovered from the river itself. Now, Ron Palmer, a retired Boeing employee who worked in manufacturing for 40 years, vividly recalled the crash. Palmer's memories of the Boeing 707 crash that day reflect not only the tragedy, but also his lifelong passion for aviation. As a longtime Boeing employee, he was keenly aware of the significance of the 707's introduction and the competitive pressures Boeing faced against Douglas and its DC-8 jetliner. When news of the crash reached him, Palmer felt forced to witness the aftermath firsthand. He vividly recalled driving up Highway 99 with his family, including his young son and wife, to the crash site near Oso. Despite being on swing shift at Boeing, he couldn't resist seeing the scene with his own eyes. Armed with his camera, he managed to approach the river's edge and capture images of the wreckage, standing there for a brief but impactful moment. Decades later, Palmer still remembered the scene clearly, the broken treetops where the aircraft had crashed, and his admiration for the pilot's skill in landing the jet under such difficult circumstances, saving half of those on board. Reflecting on media coverage at the time, Palmer noted a relative lack of attention given to the crash, perhaps reflecting the industry's internal dynamics and the emerging jet age's challenges.
It was kept quiet in this state. You know, the press really, I think, as I recall anyway, they kind of cut Boeing some slack at times, and it was a big deal for us at Boeing because we lost a product. And gosh, did we do something wrong? But no, we didn't do anything wrong. It happened up there in their flight.
For many years, the photographs Palmer took that day remained unseen. He kept them at home and didn't discuss them with anyone. Decades later, while going through old belongings, he rediscovered the photos. Despite skepticism from others who doubted the crash ever happened, Palmer had proof in his haunting images of the Boeing jet remains. There it is, he would say, showing the pictures to anyone who questioned the event. In the aftermath, the remains of the deceased were carefully transported to the Snohomish County Medical Examiner's office in Everett. There, official identification and the issuance of death certificates were carried out, marking the conclusion of a tragic event that deeply impacted the local community and aviation safety protocols. The day after the crash, the search for the scattered debris led to significant discoveries. One jet engine was located in woodlands about a mile northwest of the crash site. Not far beyond, another engine was found half a mile further in the same direction. By Monday, October 26, 1959, a helicopter pilot spotted the third engine in the general vicinity. Examination of these engines revealed that they had been violently torn from the wings during the intense Dutch roll maneuver. Remarkably, none showed signs of fire or malfunction before impact with the ground. So then what do you think allowed these engines to detach without catching fire or malfunctioning despite the violent conditions of the crash? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Following the recovery efforts, the Bonnie Watson Mortuary in Seattle undertook the solemn task of transporting the remains of the 2 Braniff Airways pilots back to their families in Dallas, Texas for funeral services and burial. Captain Burke was laid to rest at Grove Hill Memorial Park, while Captain Staley found his final resting place at Restland Memorial Park. In Bellevue, Washington, a funeral service was held for Captain Baum at Sunset Hills Funeral Home, followed by the interment of his ashes at the Garden of Devotion Columbarium in Sunset Hills Memorial Park. Meanwhile, Stokes Mortuary in Renton facilitated the transportation of flight engineer Hagen's remains to Savannah, Georgia, where he was buried. The tragic Boeing 707 crash sparked an immediate investigation by the Civil Aeronautics Board, aka the CAB. The accident, which claimed the lives of 4 crew members, including a Boeing test pilot and 2 Braniff pilots, was scrutinized to determine its cause and prevent future incidents. The CAB's investigation revealed critical details about the flight's events. The flight recorder recovered from the wreckage, although not activated for the demonstration flight, provided essential data on the aircraft's parameters. However, much of the investigation relied on the testimony of the 4 survivors and eyewitness accounts from the ground. On June 20th, 1959, the CAB released its aircraft accident report, concluding that the primary cause of the accident was the structural failure of 3 engine pylons. These failures occurred due to an improper recovery attempt from a Dutch roll maneuver that exceeded the maximum angle of bank limits specified in Boeing's training manuals. The CAB criticized Baum, the instructor pilot, for initiating the final Dutch roll too aggressively, well beyond the permissible limits. They emphasized that no training benefit justified conducting maneuvers at such extreme angles, especially given Baum's awareness of company restrictions. Now, do you think stricter adherence to flight training protocols and safety measures could have altered the outcome of this tragic incident? This incident marked the second fatal accident involving a Boeing 707 since its commercial debut with Pan American Airlines in October 1958. The first occurred on August 15, 1959, involving an American Airlines Boeing 707-123 during a training flight near the Peconic River Airport in New York, resulting in 5 fatalities. Both accidents showed the critical importance of adhering to rigorous flight safety protocols, especially during training and demonstration flights. In response to these tragic accidents, aviation authorities and manufacturers intensified safety protocols and training procedures for jet transport aircraft. The lessons learned from these investigations contributed significantly to enhancing aviation safety standards worldwide, ensuring that such devastating accidents would be less likely to recur in the future. What are your thoughts on the factors that led to the Boeing 707 crash? And how do you think the role of flight training and safety protocols has evolved since the 1950s? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for joining us on this gripping journey through the events surrounding the Boeing 707. But hey, the excitement doesn't have to end here. If you enjoyed the ride, subscribe for more thrilling tales, and feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. And before you go, make sure your seatbelt is fastened and tray tables are up. Safe travels and happy subscribing.